Think dying finally gets you out of following the rules? Think again. The legal red tape surrounding human death is a chaotic, utterly absurd circus. Today, I am exposing the 50 most ridiculous, baffling, and slightly hilarious funeral mandates from across the globe. You are about to discover that from mandatory dancing with the dead to legally prohibited heartbeats, escaping this world absolutely does not mean you escape the terrifying grip of local bureaucracy. 1. In Taiwan, ensuring your loved one gets a proper send-off means you might be socially obligated to hire an exotic dancer. Families routinely rent dancers on neon trucks to perform during the funeral procession. The cultural logic is totally practical. A massive crowd appeases wandering spirits and brings immense honor to the dead. It definitely beats stale sandwiches and awkward small talk. Honestly, wouldn't you want your final earthly celebration to be an absolute crowd-drawing rager? 2. Throughout historic Britain and early America, there was a fiercely enforced agricultural mandate known as telling the bees. If the head of a household passed away, a relative was absolutely required to walk out to the farm's hives and formally whisper the tragic news to the insects. If you broke this bizarre rule, deep-rooted superstition dictated that the bees would instantly stop making honey or completely abandon the farm. It is a wildly poetic, albeit very strange, estate planning protocol that completely respects nature. 3. In medieval Wales and parts of England, there was a deeply superstitious rule surrounding the absolution of the dead. If someone died suddenly without officially confessing their sins, the family was absolutely required to hire a sin-eater. This social outcast would literally eat a piece of bread placed directly on the corpse, absorbing the dead person's spiritual debt so their soul could easily enter heaven. It was the ultimate gig economy job, but frankly, the absolute worst way to earn a free lunch. 4. In Victorian England, the social rules of mourning were so strict that you literally had to provide physical proof of your grief. Widows were culturally mandated to collect their actual crying tears in highly ornate glass vials known as lacrimatories. Once those trapped tears completely evaporated, your official mourning period was legally and spiritually over. Can you even imagine the sheer exhausting pressure of trying to physically squeeze out enough tears just to satisfy the harsh judgment of your local neighborhood gossips? 5. Germany enforces a relentlessly strict law known as Friedhofszwang, which translates to cemetery obligation. Unlike in the United States, where you can keep grandma on the living room mantle, German law mandates that human ashes must be buried in a licensed cemetery. The government strictly insists that the dead need a highly regulated permanent address. This forces rebellious Germans to quietly smuggle their loved ones' ashes to neighboring Switzerland just to bypass the rigid bureaucracy. 6. In Madagascar, the Malagasy people follow a strict timeline for a ritual called the turning of the bones. Every 5 to 7 years, families are legally and culturally required to open the crypt, pull out the remains of their ancestors, wrap them in fresh silk shrouds, and literally dance with the corpses to live music. It is a joyous family reunion where the dead are the absolute guests of honor. Sure, it sounds like a gothic horror movie plot, but it is actually a beautiful celebration. 7. Due to a massive shortage of usable real estate, South Korea passed a pragmatic law requiring anyone buried after the year 2000 to essentially sign a temporary lease on their grave. After exactly 60 years, your underground lease expires. Your family must dig you up and cremate the remains to make room for fresh arrivals. Does a 60-year expiration date on a permanent resting place make perfect sense to you? Or does the idea of an afterlife eviction notice make you claustrophobic? 8. It is strictly against the rules to scatter human ashes at Disney World, yet people do it so often that park employees have a secret code for the offense. If you dump Uncle Bob into the water at the Haunted Mansion, a worker will immediately call in a code HEPA. The ride is entirely shut down, and a specialized crew with an ultra-fine vacuum comes in to meticulously suck up your beloved relative. That is definitely not the magical fairy tale kingdom farewell you were originally hoping for. 9. In the Greater Accra region of Ghana, social rules dictate that you must be buried in something that perfectly represents your life's work or greatest ambition. If you were a local fisherman, you're getting buried in a giant, brightly painted wooden fish. If you sold electronics, you are spending eternity trapped inside a massive vintage cell phone. This mandatory personalized branding for the afterlife transforms an incredibly sad occasion into a vibrant celebration of personal identity. 10. Even outer space has funeral regulations. When NASA started sending human ashes to the moon, they faced severe backlash from the Navajo Nation, who consider the moon a sacred entity that shouldn't be polluted with human remains. As a result, the White House had to step in and establish a formal review process for celestial burials. So now, if you want your ashes blasted into the cosmos, you essentially have to clear your cosmic funeral plans with the federal government's space bureaucracy. 11. In parts of the Middle East, a funeral is practically invalid unless there is an ear-piercing display of weeping. To follow this rigid social rule, families routinely hire professional mourners. Their entire paid job is to show up, dramatically rip their garments, and scream hysterically to guarantee the deceased looks deeply, profoundly loved by the community. It is essentially outsourced, theatrical grief. Would you ever hire an actor to loudly sob at your memorial just to boost your stats? 12. In the freezing town of Longyearbyen, Norway, there is a strict, terrifying rule. It is entirely illegal to die. Because the town is located in the Arctic permafrost, bodies buried in the local graveyard simply never decompose. When scientists realized that the lethal Spanish flu virus was perfectly preserved in corpses from a century ago, the government immediately banned all future burials. If you get terminally ill, the law requires you to be immediately flown to the mainland to pass away. 13. If you are lucky enough to have a traditional jazz funeral in New Orleans, the hired marching band must follow a very strict musical protocol. On the solemn march toward the cemetery, the band is only allowed to play heavy, sorrowful dirges. But the second the body is officially interred, the rule flips entirely. The band erupts into upbeat, jubilant jazz music to celebrate the soul's release. It is a mandatory emotional roller coaster that turns a tragic goodbye into an epic block party. 14. Among traditional Zulu families in South Africa, there is a strict architectural rule you must follow when removing a body from a home. You are absolutely forbidden from carrying the deceased out through the front door. Instead, the family must smash a brand new hole in the wall to extract the coffin, and then immediately brick it back up. The logic is that this totally disorients the deceased person's spirit, preventing the ghost from ever finding its way back inside to haunt the living. 15. In Tibet, the rocky ground is often frozen too solid to dig, and wood for cremation is incredibly scarce. This geography birthed the strict rule of the sky burial. The deceased is carried to a mountaintop and left as a final, sacred offering to the ecosystem to be naturally reclaimed by the elements. It is a profound act of charity. But here is the catch. Family members are strongly discouraged from witnessing the process. The strict belief is that your tears will anchor the soul to the earthly realm, preventing it from peacefully moving on. 16. In 2016, the Vatican issued heavily updated, incredibly strict rules for Catholics who choose cremation. While burning the body is now allowed, you are absolutely forbidden from keeping the urn on your living room shelf, dividing the ashes among relatives, or wearing them in memorial jewelry. The Church mandates that remains must be stored in a sacred, approved place like a cemetery. God's management apparently has zero tolerance for you turning grandma into a diamond necklace. 17. During the Victorian era in England, mourning rules were terrifyingly rigid for widows. If your husband died, society mandated that you wear heavy, non-reflective black clothing for exactly 2 years. If you dared to wear a single colorful ribbon or attend a lively social event before your 24 months of legally mandated misery were over, you would be instantly ostracized as a scandalous outcast. Do you think you could survive 2 whole years wearing nothing but scratchy black wool? 18. When sitting Shiva, the traditional Jewish period of mourning, there is a strict psychological rule that every single mirror in the house must be completely covered with sheets. The rule is designed to completely eliminate vanity during a time of intense grief. You are supposed to be reflecting purely on the life of the deceased, not checking to see if your hair looks good while you're crying. It forces everyone in the room to focus entirely on their inner emotions rather than outer appearance. 19. In several eco-friendly jurisdictions, the rising trend of green burials comes with incredibly specific biological rules. To be buried in certain nature reserves, you cannot be embalmed with toxic chemicals, and your coffin must be entirely biodegradable. Some rules even require you to be buried in a specialized mushroom suit. The spores in the fabric literally eat your remains, cleansing toxins from your body and feeding the surrounding forest. Talk about being forced to give back to nature. 20. The Yanomami tribe in the Amazon rainforest follows a burial rule that is guaranteed to shock modern sensibilities. They believe that a soul can only achieve eternal peace if the physical body is completely destroyed and kept within the family. To fulfill this strict mandate, the deceased is burned, and the resulting ashes are meticulously mixed into a fermented banana soup. The surviving relatives are then required to drink the mixture. It is the ultimate definition of keeping family close. 21. In Japan, after a cremation, there is a rigid, deeply respected rule where family members must use specially designed chopsticks to pick up the remaining bone fragments and pass them to one another. Because of this highly specific funeral mandate, passing food from chopstick to chopstick at a regular dinner table is considered a massive, horrifying social faux pas. You are essentially recreating a solemn death ritual over a plate of sushi. Have you ever accidentally broken a major cultural rule without knowing it? 22. Among the Torajan people in Indonesia, local rules dictate that a person is not officially considered dead until the family can afford a lavish, multi-day funeral involving expensive animal sacrifices. Until the funds are completely raised, which can honestly take months or even years, the deceased is legally and socially treated as merely being sick. They remain in the family home, receiving daily meals and casual conversation. It completely redefines the modern concept of a very long goodbye. 23. If you are planning a modern funeral in the United Kingdom or Australia, you might easily run into a strict musical veto. Many churches and crematoriums have an unofficial but fiercely enforced rule against playing specific pop songs. Tracks like the energetic Highway to Hell or Queen's Another One Bites the Dust are routinely rejected by officiants for being wildly inappropriate. It seems the local bureaucracy of death absolutely refuses to let you have a dark sense of humor on your final day. 24. In ancient Rome, wealthy families would hire dozens of professional mourners to dramatically cry at their funerals. It became such an aggressive, chaotic status symbol that the government literally had to intervene. The famous Law of the 12 Tables included a strict legal mandate forbidding women from tearing their cheeks or wailing too loudly during a public procession. When the local government has to legally mandate that you calm down at a funeral, you know the drama has gone entirely too far. 25. New York state law features a completely baffling bureaucratic double standard regarding interspecies burials. Under current legislation, it is perfectly legal for a human to have their ashes buried alongside their beloved golden retriever in a licensed and regulated pet cemetery. However, the exact reverse is strictly forbidden by state law. You absolutely cannot bury a loyal pet in a human cemetery. The afterlife real estate market apparently has a very fiercely enforced humans-only zoning policy. 26. In the mountainous region of Sagada in the Philippines, the Igorot people follow a strict eligibility rule for their famous hanging coffins. Being suspended on the face of a high cliff is considered the ultimate honor, bringing your soul much closer to heaven. But you only qualify for this elevated burial if you die of natural causes at a very old age. If you die in an accident or from a sudden illness, the community rules strictly forbid it. Would you want your final resting place to be a sheer cliff drop? 27. In the United Kingdom, there is a very strict rule you must follow before being cremated. The mortician absolutely must surgically remove your pacemaker. Why? Because under extreme heat, the lithium battery inside a pacemaker turns the device into a highly localized hand grenade. It will literally blow the heavy steel doors right off the crematorium oven. So, before you pass into the eternal flames, a professional has to guarantee you are not secretly packing heavy explosives in your chest. 28. In several East Asian cultures, the rigid rules of the afterlife economy are fiercely maintained by the living. To ensure their ancestors are not completely impoverished in the spirit realm, families are socially mandated to burn incredibly detailed paper replicas of luxury goods. We are not just talking about fake currency. Families burn highly realistic paper mansions, sports cars, and even paper designer handbags. The universal rule seems to be that capitalism totally follows you far beyond the grave. 29. During the Victorian era, the incredibly strict social rules of mourning created a massive demand for bizarre post-mortem photography. Because early cameras were incredibly expensive, a person's death was often the only time a family could justify the cost of a portrait. The absolute mandate was to make the deceased look as alive as physically possible. Photographers would prop them up on hidden metal stands and even paint open pupils directly onto their closed eyelids to satisfy this creepy social rule. 30. While the modern funeral industry is built on aggressively upselling you on velvet-lined, titanium-sealed caskets, the Amish community follows a relentlessly strict anti-commercial rule. The mandate is absolute simplicity. The deceased must be buried in a plain, unvarnished pine box, crafted by local community members, wearing incredibly simple white garments sewn by their own family. It is a completely legally binding, community-enforced rejection of every single expensive gimmick the modern death care industry offers. 31. If you attend a traditional wake in the Philippines, do not even think about grabbing a broom. There is a deeply ingrained rule that sweeping the floor while the body is lying in state will literally sweep away the family's good luck, or even worse, invite another death into the home. So, the dirt simply has to gather for days. Let me ask you this. If you could use an ancient superstition to permanently get out of doing household chores, wouldn't you milk that excuse for all it is worth? 32. The mayor of Sarpurenx, a small French village, issued a severe legal decree making it strictly illegal to die within the parish limits, unless you already owned a spot in the overcrowded local cemetery. The official penalty for breaking this bizarre law? The decree confidently promised that all offenders would be severely punished. How exactly the local police plan to punish a deceased rule breaker remains a hilarious bureaucratic mystery that we are frankly too afraid to try and solve. 33. If you are actively planning a beautifully sarcastic final joke to be carved into your headstone, you might abruptly run into the strict censorship rules of modern cemetery management. Across the United States and the United Kingdom, graveyards have legally binding clauses allowing them to flat-out reject any epitaph they deem slightly offensive, profane, or controversial. You can literally be denied your ultimate final punchline. The heavy-handed bureaucracy of death apparently has absolutely zero sense of humor about your eternal resting place. 34. In South Korea, incredibly strict government regulations on usable land mean that traditional underground burials are becoming exceedingly rare. Instead of fighting rigid real estate laws, grieving families are increasingly following a fascinating new mandate. They are turning their loved ones' cremated ashes into brightly colored, perfectly smooth glass beads. These gorgeous memorial stones are then proudly displayed in dishes right on the living room table. Would you rather be buried in the dark dirt or transformed into a shiny, conversation-starting centerpiece? 35. The complex rules of mourning absolutely extend into massive multiplayer online games like World of Warcraft. When a highly respected player dies in real life, the global digital community often holds massive in-game funerals. The strict, unwritten social rule among these gamers is an absolute ceasefire during the memorial. However, when toxic rival factions inevitably break this sacred rule and launch a digital ambush, it results in legendary server-crashing wars. It proves that even in sprawling fantasy worlds, funeral crashers remain the absolute worst kind of people. 36. In the Kingdom of Eswatini, the strict rules surrounding royal mortality are so heavily restricted that you are legally forbidden from stating that the king has died. The official government protocol fiercely dictates that citizens and journalists alike must use a highly specific nature metaphor, stating only that the tree has fallen. Announcing the monarch's death in plain, direct terms is considered a massive, highly punishable offense against the entire state. It is a fascinating linguistic loophole designed entirely to avoid the harsh reality of loss. 37. In Taiwan and various parts of China, the deeply ancient rule of burning massive piles of paper money for the dead has clashed violently with strict modern environmental laws. Because the continuous smoke from these rituals caused massive spikes in urban air pollution, local governments quickly instituted strict bans. To perfectly comply with these new clean air mandates while still honoring their ancestors' spiritual bank accounts, families are now forced to burn virtual paper money on specialized internet simulators. It is an incredibly futuristic digital compromise. 38. Many incredibly historic cemeteries across the United Kingdom have recently instituted a fiercely controversial, ironclad rule against leaving plastic flowers or synthetic teddy bears on graves. Uptight town councils passionately argue that these modern, brightly colored tributes look wildly tacky and heavily pollute the surrounding environment. If you dare to leave a fake, weatherproof bouquet, a strict municipal worker will literally confiscate it and throw it right into the local trash bin. The local government is essentially playing the role of strict fashion police for the dearly departed. 39. If you ever find yourself driving through the American South, you must immediately obey a strict, heavily enforced social rule regarding funeral processions on the highway. When a slow-moving line of cars with their headlights illuminated passes by, you are absolutely expected to pull your vehicle completely onto the shoulder and wait in respectful silence. While it is rarely a ticketable formal traffic law, blatantly breaking this unspoken regional mandate will instantly result in the most aggressive, fiercely judgmental glares you will ever experience from complete strangers. 40. During particularly intense flu seasons and recent global health crises, several small, highly traditional municipalities in southern Italy have been forced to pass strict emergency rules banning the common practice of kissing the deceased. While leaning into the open casket to give a beloved relative a final, affectionate kiss is a deeply ingrained cultural mandate, local mayors had to literally threaten grieving mourners with hefty financial fines. The government essentially had to step in and strictly outlaw a beautiful gesture of pure affection just to keep the living safe. 41. In many regions across the United States, despite what a highly persuasive funeral director might aggressively tell you, there is actually zero legal requirement to have a body completely embalmed. Unless the remains are crossing state lines or the burial is heavily delayed, skipping the toxic chemicals is totally legal. Yet, the funeral industry practically enforces it as a mandatory, highly lucrative unwritten rule. They essentially pressure grieving families into spending a small fortune just to temporarily preserve a body that is going straight into the dark ground. 42. In specific regions of Australia, to creatively save precious space in massively overcrowded urban cemeteries, there is a fascinating legal provision that officially allows you to be buried completely vertically. You literally spend eternity standing straight up in a specialized tube-like casket. It drastically cuts down on the expensive real estate required for a traditional plot. Let me ask you this. Would you rather lie comfortably for the rest of time or stand at perpetual, unblinking attention in the dark forever? 43. Let us briefly look at the incredibly strict historical rules of ancient Greece. It was an absolute legal and spiritual mandate to place a highly valuable coin, known as an obol, directly into the mouth of the deceased. This was absolutely not a polite tip. It was mandatory toll money for Karen, the terrifying ferryman of the underworld. If your family foolishly forgot to pay up, Your soul was legally required to endlessly wander the muddy shores of the river Styx for 100 exhausting years. 44. In Japan, if you happen to be walking down the street and see a traditional funeral hearse drive past, there is a strict, deeply ingrained cultural superstition demanding that you instantly hide your thumbs tightly inside your closed fists. In Japanese, the thumb literally translates to the parent finger, and failing to physically protect it is strongly believed to invite an early, tragic death to your own living parents. It is a wildly stressful, instantaneous reflex test disguised as profound respect for the dead. 45. Traditional Irish wakes possess a fiercely unbending social rule regarding the primary window in the room where the deceased is currently resting. The heavy glass must be left wide open for exactly 2 hours to allow the departed spirit to easily exit the home. However, you absolutely cannot stand anywhere between the physical body and that open window. If you accidentally block the invisible exit path, you might inadvertently trap a highly confused, incredibly frustrated ghost inside your living room permanently. Would you risk being haunted just to get a better view? 46. The Parsi community in India follows incredibly strict, ancient environmental mandates regarding human death. Their religion fiercely forbids traditional burying or cremating of bodies, as doing so is believed to heavily pollute the sacred elements of earth and fire. Instead, the unbending rule is to place the deceased high up in a massive, open-air stone structure called a Tower of Silence. There, the harsh sun and local scavenger birds naturally dispose of the remains. It is the ultimate uncompromising form of ancient eco-friendly recycling. 47. In 17th century England, the government passed a highly aggressive, fiercely enforced piece of legislation known as the Burying in Woolen Act. To artificially boost the struggling local textile industry, it became strictly illegal to bury a body in anything other than pure English wool. If you dared to dress a deceased loved one in fancy imported silk or linen, authorities would aggressively fine your grieving family. The government literally forced everyone to make a mandatory, highly itchy posthumous fashion statement just to artificially fix the national budget. 48. Singapore currently enforces some of the absolute strictest, most unforgiving land conservation laws on the entire planet. The local government strictly enforces an ironclad legal rule limiting all cemetery burial periods to a maximum of exactly 15 years. Once your incredibly brief time is up, you are forcibly exhumed and immediately cremated. If your family somehow forgets to claim your remains, the state simply scatters your ashes at sea. This harsh afterlife eviction notice is completely non-negotiable, regardless of who you were in life. 49. In the state of Massachusetts, there is a highly obscure but deeply funny local health regulation explicitly stating that funeral directors cannot serve sandwiches or any food during a wake if it happens to be in the exact same room as the deceased. You physically have to walk into another entirely designated, heavily sanitized room just to eat your sad egg salad. Because mixing profound human grief and heavy mayonnaise right next to an open casket is apparently where the local government finally draws the line. Alright, we have covered 49 utterly baffling regulations, and there is just one final mandate left. But before we reveal number 50, it is time for the final verdict. In our subjective opinion, the award for the most ridiculous rule on today's list goes to Sarparanx, France. Simply because a local mayor literally threatened to severely punish people for the incredibly selfish act of dying without a pre-approved cemetery plot is completely unhinged bureaucracy. Do you agree with our verdict? Or did another bizarre mandate deserve the top spot? Let us know in the comments. Now, for our final number. 50. Legally speaking, in the United States and the United Kingdom, there is a completely mind-blowing rule of quasi-property regarding human remains. Under the strict letter of the law, a dead body is not actually considered property. No one legally owns you after you proudly draw your last breath. The strict legal mandate grants your next of kin only quasi-property rights, which simply means they have the unbending legal duty to properly dispose of you. You are essentially reduced from a living, breathing human being into a mandatory, legally enforced chore, Death might be the great universal equalizer, but as we have thoroughly proved today, the bureaucracy surrounding it is a complete, unending circus. Whether you are avoiding a posthumous eviction or hiding your thumbs from a passing hearse, humanity's final rules are delightfully absurd. If you could legally mandate one ridiculous rule for your own funeral just to prank your relatives, what would it be? Mandatory clown shoes? A ban on crying? Tell us your wildest demands in the comments below. Smash that subscribe button, and I will see you next time.